Okay, Dr. Stratton, you're here telling us that we should drop Calvinism, drop determinism, because the highest form of love requires libertarian freedom. And yet we had the mutual love within the Trinity. Naturally, I agree with this argument. I feel compelled to voice the one objection that commonly comes to, and this would affect, I think, if not just one, maybe more than one of your premises. And that is the notion that, okay, Dr. Stratton, you're here telling us that we should drop Calvinism, drop determinism, because the highest form of love requires libertarian freedom. And yet we had the mutual love within the Trinity in a timeless state, sans creation. So how do you work with all of that? First of all, it would seem like you'd have to argue, because I noticed in the premise here, Tim, and I'm just interested because I'm sure you've thought through all this. This is not me trying to get you. I'm actually genuinely interested about how you handle this, because I noticed you mentioned in 2.1, premise 2.1, a genuine eternal love relationship between God and humans necessarily requires that humans possess libertarian freedom. When I think about writing arguments, it seems like you intentionally specified humans instead of and I imagine you're trying to not deal with that question about the nature of God's freedom when we're trying to focus on this, and all we need for this is human freedom. But then it makes me wonder, okay, I know Tim affirms that God has libertarian freedom of a sort, at least in the source sense, that nothing he does, nothing external to him determines his choices. But in other words, it seems like maybe have to be some support to get me on board as a Calvinist with the notion that I would have to believe in freely given love when even if I adopted human libertarian free will as the argument requires, I might think of the counter example of God, because in the Trinity, I don't yet believe, you haven't yet given me an argument to think that God has libertarian freedom.
Yeah. So first of all, Kirk McGregor gave a fantastic argument for God's libertarian freedom during the debate, and Guillaume Bignon never rejected it. Didn't even try.
It was fantastic. I'm sorry. I know we kind of have a little bit of structure to this because we have what we want to cover, but oh my gosh, Tim, you're absolutely right. Because I listened to 2 or 3 debates this weekend, but I'm thinking it's the one where he basically argued from the bottom to the top. Basically, if at the lowest levels there's not free will, then there's not free will at the top levels. And he was doing a parody, I think, of something maybe in Guillaume's book from what he said. Does that sound right?
Yeah, I think something along those lines. Okay. But yeah, I mean, Kirk gave a fantastic argument. Bignon in the past has made claims that he wasn't sure if God even had libertarian freedom, and didn't, and he said things to the effect that he didn't think it would be that much of, wouldn't be that big of a deal if he didn't. And I've argued otherwise. It would be a big deal if God didn't have libertarian freedom. In fact, I've offered those arguments in my book as well. But Kirk gave an argument with a different spin to it. But to answer your question about my argument, God is love, 1 John 4:8. So when we're talking about the ability to do otherwise, I don't think God has the ability not to love. That's just his nature. God is love, and he loves, each person of the Trinity loves the other persons of the Trinity. Each person of the Trinity loves every other person ever created. I would argue that God even loves Satan, right? But Satan hates God. So, but you can't force love upon a person. That's intuitively obvious. Now, what I do, and I've talked about this on my website, I think in an article called "The Best Kind of Love." I could be wrong on that, but
no, I've read the article. I do remember that now that you mentioned it on FreeThinker. Yeah.
So here's the deal. Love can't be forced upon somebody else or on someone by somebody else. So, but God is love by nature. It's not forced upon him by something or someone else. Now, if God gave us a loving nature, it would be forced upon us by God. So he can't do that. So he's got to give us the ability to do otherwise, I believe. But God is free in the source sense. Nothing is determining him to love other people. He's just loving by nature. So, but God can't force us to freely love. That's impossible. That's like trying to make create a married bachelor. So God gives us libertarian freedom so we can resist his love or not. So I would just point people to that article to get started. And I've done
I'm
more
looking at the
work
other
on that.
premises right now. I'm not looking away and ignoring you. And yeah, I mean, I would want to look at it further, but it looks good to me. And with that clarification, I think we got a strong argument here.